And I believe we're live. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm joined with Emory, Moynagh, and Wesley Coleman. And I just wanted to thank again Dr. Dan for having his Ask Me Anything show. So this is an after show to that, but we don't necessarily have to stick to everything that was talked about on Dr. Dan's channel. Again, a hearty thank you to Dr. Dan. I do see some names from his channel that are visiting here, so a good welcome here. And so thank you all for visiting. Now, I am trying to monitor the quality of video on YouTube because sometimes the cameras don't look so good, you know, the images. I may have to shut off my camera. And Wesley, I think if you have problems with your camera, you can shut that off and you can still have audio. So
okay, yeah.
I think most people know who I am, but just briefly, I'm Salvador Cordova. I'm just, people ask me what I do. I just like, I'm a perpetual troublemaker. So the hell about
You're a professional nerd. You're a professional nerd.
I'm a molecular biophysics researcher, independent. I had worked as an independent contractor for 7 years under Dr. John C. Sanford. I'm still his colleague. We work together on projects. In fact, I hope he doesn't get mad that I've been doing videos instead of finishing the paper we agreed I would do. Actually, 2 papers. I will be at the Dallas Discovery Institute conference January 22nd. I'll be visiting the ICR and maybe meet some people there. Someone from the chat has said he's planning to come out. So just so you know, we might be able to run into each other there if anyone's deciding to go. There'll be a lot of my friends from over the last 20 years. Many of them are going to be the speakers, the featured speakers at that conference. This was also the same conference, I believe, where James Tour gave his legendary critique of abiogenesis. And that was interesting. So, Emory, feel free to introduce yourself because there may be some newcomers here.
Sure. As you can see, my name is Emory Moynagh. I am a graduate student in biology because I hate my life. No, but and also because I'm kind of like Sal, I'm a professional nerd. I play with gene sequences for fun. Okay, so then I think that puts me in the professional nerd category. And I also want to extend my thanks to Dr. Dan for hosting me and Sal on the AMA. It was very, very kind of him to allow us to join. So thank you, Dr. Dan, if you're listening for that. My interests in science are mostly biology, genetics, speciation, baraminology, that sort of area. But I'll get into other areas of biology as well. But I let Sal handle the molecular biology stuff because that's stuff I try to avoid if I can. And Sal says he's the professional troublemaker. No, Sal's the nice guy. I'm the attack dog. Sal's the nice guy. If we put the two of us in the same room and try to flip a coin to see which one is going to be the one doing the attacking, it's going to be me 9 times out of 10 probably. So,
Wesley.
Yeah, I'm Wesley Coleman, and I'm actually not a science major. I majored in I got an associate's in sound engineering, like music engineering, and I'm a composer, and I do like part-time gigs, and yeah, but basically I'm an avid science hobbyist, and fascinated by all kinds of topics like, you know, genetics and geology and stuff like that.
Well, some people know that I was a classical piano student before I degenerated into the sciences. No insult intended, but that's how it felt. I mean, I had to make a living, and it's just too hard to make a living as a classical musician unless you're at the very, very, very top tier. And the year that I had studied piano and I was practicing 15 hours a day. That probably was the happiest year of my life, and it was painful to say goodbye to it. So definitely, when I saw your association with music, Wesley, there was definitely a connection there, and
Yeah,
that does
cool.
seem so far. The music life seems so far removed from my life now, and I really do miss it. Now, people know that I love airplanes, so I think first would be music, because when my mom tells me that when she was pregnant with me, she'd play classical music into her womb, into her stomach, and I could hear it. And when I was like a newborn, she would play it day and night. And so when I was a teenager, she noticed I was listening. I couldn't stop listening to like the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. And one day I was like 18 years old, and I was at the dinner table, and she looked at me. She said, "Yeah, you know that piece you listen to all the time? I played that for you night and day when you were an infant. I played it into my stomach." So when she was pregnant with me. So that's my strong connection there. The next would be my love of aviation and submarines. So a lot of people don't know that when I get really stressed out, I like to read about history of aviation. So they're just, there's sides of me that you don't see on this channel so much that I'd love to talk more about. Like, for example, even though I didn't watch the game yesterday, congratulations to the Georgia Bulldogs for beating the Alabama Crimson Tide. Sorry to all you Crimson Tide fans. And I know the Capstone reporter is really heartbroken. I shouldn't laugh, though, because he airs a lot of my articles. So sorry about that, Alan.
Alan's got to be livid. I didn't see an article from him today, so maybe that's why.
Yeah. So the Bulldogs came from behind in the fourth quarter. I didn't watch it, so I haven't watched a lot of football this season. So there's that other part that used to be also how I wasted my time. But I think we all have to have something like that, because life is pretty stressful in this fallen world. So Wesley, you had written me. Let me pull up your email. I'm not going to read it verbatim, obviously. I want to respect.
Okay.
You said you've been writing an article on teaching evolution for creationist perspective.
Yeah.
Do you have any interest in teaching evolution or biology, just for practice, for anything, or?
I feel like
Not to put you on the spot or anything,
yeah, I feel like if I did go to get a degree like in molecular biology, cellular biology, or something like that, I'd probably be doing research. That's probably what I'd be most interested in. I don't consider myself a good teacher by any means.
Okay. Well, that was kind of the topic I was interested in. Emory, do you feel qualified that you could teach evolution to creationists? I don't. Just so you know. Wesley's email kind of sparked something in me. It's like, they keep accusing me of not understanding evolution. I think one way to kind of dispel that is I want to be able to
probably teach certain aspects of it.
Yeah.
But others, I mean, first, well, to be fair, evolution is a very wide and broad topic. So I don't know that there's any person on the planet who's qualified to teach all of it at the same time. But I do think that I probably could teach. I might be able to do selection, drift, mutations at a base level. But that'd be about as much as I could probably guarantee. And maybe speciation. I could probably do speciation. But other topics within evolutionary biology, no, I couldn't. I don't think I could do that.
Well, I think Dr. Dan gave an interesting response to one of my questions tonight. So I would begin that. Bread of Life can't join. All right. So, well, it's nice to see you anyway, Rebecca, so you can listen while you're packing and doing your work. I said, do you believe in last universal common ancestor? And I said, I'd begin with that. I'd say evolution, the theory of evolution teaches we had one universal common ancestor at some point in history. And it's not exactly easy to define what happened before
Right.
that. I would feel comfortable with saying that'd be my first, that's the way I would introduce evolution theory, is probably at the very basis is universal common ancestry. Do you have any feelings about that?
I mean, if you're going to explain evolution, you need to get people to understand that is the foundational point, is that there is somewhere in the tree of life a universal common ancestor, and then there's the universal common ancestor of eukaryotes. I think that's a logical place to start.
Yeah. But, I was really hoping Dr. Dan would say, oh, independent origins, and because that would just didn't quite give us that. So I was just like, oh, bummer, So when he said that he believes in a Luca, I was just like, oh, because I was just trying to hope he would give us at least a little orchard to start with, because then you can start to build the orchards wider. So that's what I would begin with. And then I specifically asked him about the mechanisms of evolution. And he said there's widespread agreement. And I would say there is widespread agreement among biologists, but among the specialists, and I specifically mentioned Masatoshi Nei, there are definitely a lot of neutralists out there that don't think natural selection does much. And as a matter of principle, it's not, if you go through the equations of population genetics, it's like, well, it's kind of hard to, like, let's say you have a bazillion traits and you only have a population of 10 individuals. That's when I began to see neutral theories. It's like, oh, you can't select for every trait possible. And neutral theory says that. And I think the natural extension of that is you can't, as a matter of principle, natural selection cannot be a major force in shaping. And so the whole thing with the ENCODE thing is the more nucleotides have to be selected, that have some function, it means you have more things that cannot, as a matter of principle, be the result of natural selection.
Right. Before you get on going down the rabbit trail, Sal, most of the audience probably doesn't know what neutral theory is. So can you explain neutral theory real quick? I know what it is, but I don't know if everybody else does. So can you explain neutral theory?
Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness. And Wesley, you got to interrupt me if you want me to, because you'll actually help. This is why Rebecca's good, because I'm so used to talking to other guys like Emory here. We start to talk in our specialized language and say, well, why don't you clarify that, Sal? Explain. So
just throw your hat at us and let us know that we're talking.
Okay, so
okay, yeah.
Darwin said, the origin of species by means of natural selection. And what he really meant, and I liked what Dr. Dan said, is that there's a whole semester on what species means, and by the end, you'll see the faculty and grad students not agree the meaning. And I'm like, that was probably the best part of the whole show, just to see them argue, because I've said it's a pointless argument for even creationists to weigh in. If they don't agree on it, don't weigh in on it. So the reason I meant that is, even though the title of the book was Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, I think the main thing he was really trying to convey was in chapter 6, the organs of extreme perfection and complication. How an organ like that could come to be. And I did want to ask Dr. Dan, have you read the entire Origin of Species? I haven't. I've read select chapters and passages. And so Darwin was saying most of the functional stuff you see in biology is the result of natural selection, one little improvement at a time. So people who've read Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins gives that weasel illustration where it's a genetic algorithm, kind of makes out all the letters that thinks it like a weasel. But what what happened in the 1950s and 60s, they came up with these theories of non-Darwinian evolution, not because they were creationists, but they said it's just not feasible to evolve all the molecules of life to have its features. It has to be free of selection as a matter of principle. And so I kind of alluded to it. Let's say you have 10, 20, 30, 40,000, a million traits that you're trying to evolve one trait over the other. And you have a small population, say of 10 people. You can't, you can't really select for every trait simultaneously, or, what they call specifically, maybe only an aggregate, but then it starts to get, kind of, what ends up happening is if you run the simulations on this, you'll see a lot of traits just kind of not, either get incorporated in the population or get thrown out of the population just on blind chance. And there are even more complications than that. Let's say you have two individuals, one that's fast and one that's smart. It's desirable to have both traits. Or let's say that we want to have a situation where two traits are desirable. I'm just going to point out speed and intelligence, but you can make it anything you want. But let's say a lion comes along, and who's going to survive? The slow smart kid or the fast dumb kid? Well, the fast dumb kid is going to win that battle of selection, and there goes an otherwise good trait. So we began to see things like that. Dr. Dan says, I have read the whole thing. Oh, good on you.
Good on you. That's an impressive feat. It's a bit of a slog.
Yeah. So the point, and Dr. Sanford uses the word interference selection, and that may trace to Walter Remind. So we have these camps especially in the population genetics camps, they're very, very, the population genetics are the mathematician types, and math and biology don't often mix. Joe Felsenstein said he went into population genetics because he didn't like going out in the field and being terrorized by chipmunks. So the population genetics types usually reject the idea that selection has shaped most of the genome. And then you could say by way of extension, natural selection didn't do much of anything. It clearly exists for like really strongly selectable traits like pesticide resistance. If you start spraying pesticide on critters, there might be a few critters that happen to have a trait that help them resist the pesticide, and they end up dominating the population in the next generation. So that's a long-winded answer, basically saying neutral theory says most of the genome was not shaped by natural selection. And by way of extension, some people have taken it farther and saying most of anything's not been shaped by natural selection. So I don't know what proportion of people subscribe to that.
It was really popular in the 60s and 70s. It's fallen out a little bit since then. Basically, once Kimura became kind of older and stopped publishing, it kind of fell off.
And here's one example. No tusks in some elephants. Dr. Dan put this out in one of my debates with him, where he said that's an example of selection where because the hunters were hunting for ivory and for the tusks, that was a strong selection pressure for elephants without tusks. And so I presume now the greater proportion of elephants out there in the wild, it's gotten a greater proportion of them without tusks.
Well, it's not a greater proportion. It's in some herds. Some herds are almost completely tuskless now, whereas others that haven't been hit as hard by the poaching still have tusks. It really depends on what population you're dealing with. But yes, he's correct. That is a example of fairly strong artificial selection on the population, because the hunters only want the animals with the biggest tusks. So they kill off the animals with the biggest tusks, and guess what? Those genes aren't there anymore. And the tusks get smaller, and smaller, and eventually disappear just because the genes go away as the hunters kill off the big ones. So,
so Wesley, you had some questions for me. So before we move on from kind of the stuff we talked about on the show, I mean, after we'll talk a little bit more about the show, then we can get to some of your questions. We've got 2 people here. It was painful for me to listen to all the gene stuff.
sorry, Sal.
I love proteins. You know, I wasn't that way until I went into the protein world, and I was just so fascinated after that point. But what is this thing about the species code or whatever?
Okay, it's a long, complicated story. I asked the question because I kind of wanted to see where Dr. Dan was, but basically, there's a bunch of different ideas of what a species is in the evolutionary community, and as Dr. Dan said, some people have just said forget the whole thing and let's look at lineages. It's so bad that there was actually one evolutionary biologist who quipped, in a room of N biologists, there will be N+1 species definitions. I wish I was making that up, but no, that's actually
no, that's good. No, seriously, as far as creationists are concerned, that was a good point by Dr. Dan. That's why I want creationists, because at the non sequitur show they're talking about speciation, and I just wanted to say I dropped the whole topic. Dr. Dan gave me a gem there and said, and also what you just said, they're N+1 definitions of speciation. Mm-hmm. That's not what creationists need to argue, mm-hmm. because they're going to get in the mess of definitions. So if they want to argue their case, and I threw this out on the non sequitur show, go to the molecular level. And so this is an announcement. I'm going to be doing a show specifically to address what Steve McCrae said. That was really interesting, Sal. I want you to come back on here. And I said, I'll make you a little show about why I think evolutionary theory is very problematic. And I'm going to go to the proteins. And I threw out the thing that there's no universal common ancestor of proteins. There are various ways to say that. So Eugene Koenig calls it the web of life for proteins. And you could, and Dr. Dan threw out, he said, Sal, that's a whole nother hour discussion on the proteins. And he used a term that I've not heard. He said it's a saturation problem or something like that. Oh, hey, you get some points here.
I mean, okay. It would be nice if we could get some clarity, but it's a mess. Dr. Dan's 100% right. It is an absolute mess.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Jeanson, but you know, I don't think you helped by adding your definition. Because Dr. Jeanson came out and I was like, no, Nathaniel, don't do that to me. Because he came out, he has this idea about what species are, and I was like, no, let's not go there because no one's going to agree. And I think it's beside the point anyway. What you wanted to talk about is alleles, created alleles. You don't have to talk about, you don't have to conflate it with speciation. So I remember I was sitting there 2017. He and I were talking to a hostile crowd of biologists at a Christian college because they hated me and him for being young earth creationists. And then Dr. Jeanson kind of talked about his ideas about what species are. And I was like, no, Nathaniel, don't do that to me. So anyway, short announcement. I'm going to be, Steve McCrae said, that's really interesting, your ideas about proteins. I want to hear why you reject evolutionary theory based on proteins. And so I'm going to be doing a show on that. So let's see. Oh, you go, Dr. Dan.
And as I just said, nothing has changed in 150 years. We all know what we mean when we say a species, but we can't agree on what it means.
So creationists, you know, I have a list of things that arguments creationists should not use. If you're basing your argument on one particular definition of species, I suggest you you dump it. Okay, not a.
I'm kind
It's
of.
gonna be a
honestly-
mess.
I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of with Dr. Dan, where let's just dump the whole concept of species and just, I mean, to my mind, I think of species as breeds within a created kind. So, like, just dump the whole concept of dealing with a species. Okay, we got a variety here, we got a variety there. Okay, yep. Nobody well, okay, maybe ardent dog breeders do, but nobody argues if a poodle is a different, variety than a Great Dane. We just go, oh, it's a poodle. Oh, it's a Great Dane. Okay, great, we've got it. Now let's move on to something a little more interesting.
We might revisit the show a little bit again, but I would say that one discussion that he highlighted about species was probably worth the whole show right there for me as a creationist, because it was good to hear it from him. And then your quote there, Emory, N+1.
It's not original with me. I think it comes from John Wilkins, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I mean, it's just species is one of those things where you just kind of go, hey, let's all argue about something that's mostly pointless. And, let's all hate each other because we're arguing about something that's mostly pointless. I mean, the things that I have read in some of these papers I've read on species is like, oh my goodness, these people hate each other.
Emory. Okay, Emory, I'll let you have a little at this one because I'm going to bring something up on the.
Yeah, that's fine. So if you want a good definition of a kind, to me, it's just a reproductive group. I think that's the most biblical way to define it. I get that there is a species concept that is that goes along with that, and sort of if they can reproduce. But the thing is, the biological species concept, which is based on reproductive isolation, really doesn't actually hold strict reproductive isolation because they allow for hybrid zones and so on. Whereas I would say there's no hybridization between two created kinds. So there is a difference, a distinct and important and distinct difference. Although I will agree with you, there needs to be a better and more formal and more accessible definition of a formal definition of a kind for the purposes of research. So I'll give you that much.
All right, so I'm gonna, Wesley, do you have any thoughts while I try to bring up my computer screen on something? And we'll get to your questions after I get into this, because I really wanted to talk about architecture, but go ahead.
About like kinds and species.
Yeah,
okay.
If you don't have any, don't worry. I'll move on to what I was, because I was talking about architectures. And again, I'm not an organismal level guy. It was fun hearing Dr. Dan talk about all these critters, and just like, no, that is so far removed from where I am, because I'm in the protein world. But let me just show something here. I can type in like a gene name, and it's going to find an architecture. And I'll show you something statistical here. So I studied one particular class of beta-lactamase proteins, what they colloquially call myelonases. And I went to the Uniprot database, and I'm grabbing. And so this is a little bit of a refresher on our tutorial on gene browsing, protein browsing. The Uniprot is a great way to survey proteins. And let me see, I need to go to there are two, see if I could find it. Do they have it? Okay, I think I need to go to I'm going to go to the GenBank to see this particular protein. It's taking me to Europe. It's not supposed to do that. Stop.
I didn't realize you were teleporting to Europe, so.
What?
I didn't realize you were teleporting to Europe.
Yeah, I need to select. I want to go to the United States. Okay, we'll do the United States here. GenBank is the United States. EMBL is the European Data Bank. So let's go USA here. All right, so when we look at the sequence here, it's like, well, that looks like gibberish. But we can actually put it through a computational scoring system that'll classify like what domains are in it. So we have these discrete architectures, and it'll say, okay, this is a cubico peptidase beta lactamase class C family. But where I was headed with that is it can even put a score in it in terms of how strongly it can be classified this way. So what ends up happening, is you have orchards of architectures, and you could throw it through this computational system. So the first thing is orchards of architectures in terms of just the sequence. But where it's really powerful, and we don't have a lot of data on this because it's very hard to do X-ray crystallography, but when you actually have the protein fold, you can judge the protein folds by how close they're all shaped. And they end up being an orchard too. And the nice thing about this, and I alluded to it, is that there are a lot of proteins you can't say it has a common ancestor because it's stitched together. I mean, it's the promiscuous domain problem. It's like, even if however you assume what the ancestors were, it's kind of like recombination, so to speak. You end up getting a mix of pieces from all these ancestral genes, hypothetically, to make this one. That's another reason I'm a creationist, because I think it's just too hard to you don't even have full-scale gene duplication. You would have to have like pieces of gene duplication, and then you stitch them together in some coherent way. But the thing is, despite the fact you have, this lack of a unified phylogeny, you're able to come up with these bit scores like this. You get these orchards. And that's why I said I prefer classifying things based on architectures, because you kind of dump phylogeny. And I kind of alluded to it a little bit when I talked about the marsupials and placentals. They say that the marsupials and placentals split off from a common ancestor, but the fact that you have a squirrel that's a marsupial and a placental that's a squirrel, so marsupial that's a squirrel and a placental that's a squirrel, that similarity is not based on common descent.
It's a little squirrely, isn't it, so?
Yeah.
It's late at night. I'm a lot of
Oh, yeah. So what I was saying is, when you have architectural classifications, and we're starting to see this in proteins, you dump phylogeny and you actually have overlapping hierarchies. And, I totally get it. In baraminology, you want to have like the created organismal kind, and that's valid. Just like it says in the Bible that they bred after their kind and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I think there are also created architectures that are spread out through biology. Like, I think the eye, for example, is a created architectural kind, and it's been implemented like 40 different ways. So that's why I kind of like the architectural. That's why I'm a Linnaean. And Dr. Dan was saying, that was the 1700s, we need to go to the lineages. And I think Guzman had a good point and they're talking about redoing all the lineages. I said, what's going to happen when some phylogeneticist comes along and said, no, your lineages are all wrong. You're going to have to rename everything.
Yeah. And that was kind of why I asked about whether you'd have the same problem with a lineage as you would with a species problem. Where's your bifurcation? You're still making an arbitrary division to me. I don't think, and Dr. Dan, this is not a criticism of you. I'm just not sure that that going to lineages even solves the problem for them, because you don't have a hard cutoff line where you can say, yes, this is a lineage and this is. I mean, how do you decide where you start your lineage? because ultimately, in their view, the lineage goes all the way back to a universal common ancestor. So, where do you put that lineage line, I guess, would be my immediate question. Like, and I understand you wanting to trace things through lineages, and that's fine. Okay. I like the Linnaean system. I think it's fallible. It's a man-made system. There's no perfect system, but I think it's a solid system for what we need it for. But I also kind of look at where you want to go with the lineages, and I understand wanting to trace, species history or whatever. If you don't dump the species name, but at the same time, like, I don't think it solves the problems that they're trying to solve with it.
And I also wanted to just throw this out. The thing with architecture is you don't have to go back into history. You can just do your comparative anatomy today and say, okay, this one, you can look at the creatures today and then kind of build your Venn diagrams. It's a little easier trying to, you won't have any disagreements about who evolved from what, because it's not considered. So that's the school of what I think they call transformed Platism. And Michael Denton mentioned it in his book, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. And so we don't have to argue about whether birds descended from dinosaurs. You just say, okay, you have the dinosaur architecture, the bird architecture. And so anyway, we beat that horse enough for tonight. Wesley, you had some questions you were asking me, so we're going to go off topic and then probably close the show down and do a quick night.
When Sal says it'll be a quick night, we'll be here for at least another hour.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
So you had a lot of questions in the chat on some of our other shows, and I just didn't get around to them, so I want to make myself available to you.
Oh, right. Yeah, I had a few questions. Let me see.
I remember one of them. You asked about like selection. Under strong selection, you can't select all the bad mutations or something,
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah, so something like, I heard a number somewhere around like 90% of deleterious mutations. But I can't find a study for that, so I have no way of corroborating it. So I was just wondering if you.
I've never heard it said that way.
Okay.
I will tell you what it's a safe figure. We have had people say that 90 to 99.99% of the mutations are deleterious, which means they compromise reproductive success in the evolutionary definition.
Right. Right.
So, but I have to qualify the meaning of deleterious and beneficial. Deleterious in the evolutionary sense means it's just less reproductively fit, whereas kind of in the more, sometimes that correlates
like in the genome.
to functionality. Yeah.
Like
sometimes
deleterious
that
in the
correlates.
genome, you mean?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, like deleterious in the genome, you mean, rather than superficially, phenotypically.
Deleterious, I'd say phenotypically.
It doesn't have to be phenotypically. Any mutation that reduces reproductive output would be considered deleterious. Whereas any mutation that increases reproductive output would be considered beneficial. Whether or not it's phenotypically visible or not, and whether or not the phenotypic outcome is one that we would think of as a beneficial outcome or not, as long as it increases reproductive value. Am I about right on that, Sal?
I think so, and I think that I've been arguing that the evolutionary definition is kind of mush, because it should be instinctively. I'll give you two examples. One, sickle cell anemia. In a malaria environment like Africa, it'd be beneficial. Technically speaking, it's what they call heterozygous advantage. And that's just for the aficionados out there, just to let them know I understand a nuance there. But if you take that same trait in North America where it's cold and there's not or anywhere that there's no malaria, that would be reproductively not successful.
Right.
So one of the problems is here is like it becomes very context and environmental dependent whether a trait is beneficial or not. From an engineering standpoint, that just seems kind of like repulsive, you know. You can't say that it is, you know, it'll perform this way functionally in one environment and functionally in another. So just like when I have aircraft specifications, it's like there's certain altitudes this aircraft is really good at, whereas another aircraft is really good at another altitude or other conditions. In the extreme, you'd say, well, a whale, you know, a submarine's not adapted to operate in the land, and a car's not adapted to operate underwater.
Sure.
And that's how we would do, like, you know, kind of functional notion of good and bad. So the point is, beneficial yet or deleterious, you have to be really careful. And one thing that Michael Behe found out is that in laboratory conditions, most quote unquote beneficial mutations are actually loss of function, kind of in the medical or engineering sense. You know, I don't know that he said 90%, but he said a very large majority are. And I've gone on this channel and I gave illustrations of why that is, because if you just look at certain proteins, they're so specialized, like just like a nut fitting into a bolt. Any way you change like the bolt, it's not going to be any good. You're either making it too big or too small. There's an optimal fit. So any variations, just as a matter of principle, is not going to be good. And a lot of proteins are that way. They are so specialized. So any change is usually bad in an engineering sense. But what ends up happening is sometimes you can knock out genes and they'll be saying, oh, look at this beneficial mutation. So that being said, even by the evolutionary definition, most are reproductively deleterious. But then if you add the functional idea, even the ones that are considered beneficial are also damaging. So when you have a situation like that, like say a couple has 10 kids and each of them have 100 new birth defects in their genome that their parents didn't have, doesn't matter who you select, the next generation is a little bit more defective than the parents. So it's survival of the fittest among the siblings, but it's certainly not survival of the fittest in terms of the best genome, because the best genome is the parents.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the basics. That's really the simplified version of genetic entropy. And Dr. Sandford had a whole book on this, but I've tried to boil it down into that. And I've had diagrams to kind of show that. You know, if you diagram that pictorially, it's pretty hard not, you know, to deny the possibility of genetic deterioration. And that's one reason I am a creationist, by the way. Did you have other questions there, Wesley? Oh, Sandy, would you like to join in? Let me just type a letter to Sandy here. I'll drop you a link if you want to come in, Sandy.
I'll just tack on a little bit. Sorry, I was responding to something in the chat. I'll just tack a little bit onto what Sal said. The fact that we have genomic degradation between each generation really ties into the concept of genetic entropy, because essentially the genome is breaking down, and doesn't matter how much you'd have to apply exponential amounts of selection more than is available to get rid of all those new birth defects or mutations that are being handed down from mother and father to the kids. You can slow it down. You can by outbreeding and you can slow it down, but you can't stop it. It's not And I mean, that and Sal knows about this paper, that there's been papers published where population geneticists have literally asked the question, why aren't we dead 100 times over?
Yeah. Oh, Colonel Kaleem, sir.
The commander has arrived.
What's happening, fellas?
Well, I've been kind of iced in the whole week, so that's why you saw so many of my me every night almost. And Emory's, he's taking a semester break from graduate school. I said we could hang out and just nerd out for
Cool.
7 nights in a row. Oh goodness.
Hey, Sal, I sent you a link to an article from Reformation Charlotte today that linked back to Joe Carter at McLean. He wrote an article 2 years ago that said basically that anybody who is propagating hydroxychloroquine or anything other than the vaccine should be brought before church discipline.
Whoa. Okay, so the only thing, I just got to point this out. Probably the biggest sharp disagreement I had with Dr. Dan tonight was his advocation.
Closing line.
Oh boy. I just didn't want to get into that fight.
Yeah,
For the record, guys, I've had 1,000 vaccinations probably at least in my lifetime because I have flu problems, and then whenever I had traveled, they'd shoot you up with whatever when you go overseas, at least when,
Oh man, I filled up 2 shot cards going overseas. Anthrax, yellow fever, you name it. Gamma globulin shots before we were swimming in a dirty harbor. Ridiculous.
And I had allergies, so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. So guys, this is the point in the show where we're probably done with the Ask Me Anything on evolutionary biology. It's just a free-for-all. And Sandy went to the same.
All of these guys that that because one is repulsed by the vaccines, given all the medical data that we've accumulated, are called anti-vaxxers. I got more vaccines than Carter's got pills. I mean, good Lord, it's ridiculous. So because we've seen all of these deaths, especially again with these young athletes, but that's the reason that the 26 Navy SEALs didn't want to get the vax, and they have a stay in court now for that. And I don't know what Wyman Howard is the commander of Naval Special Warfare. I knew him when he was an ensign at SEAL Team 8. I don't know what the heck he's thinking about, but or looking for his next star, maybe, I don't know. But it's just a broad sweeping analogy to say that we're anti-vax when we have clear evidence that the vaccines are not what they propose to be. In fact, Dave Rubin was talking about that tonight. So, and Rochelle Walensky of the CDC has said the same thing, that although it may lessen the effects of COVID, by no means do they prevent COVID. A, B, they do not prevent transmission. So there's good reasons why people should not be getting the vax. That if you want to get the vax, go nuts. I'm all about it, but no thanks. I've seen too much evidence. And when I got really sick, every time I had to go to Africa, I had to get a yellow fever shot. Man, I was down for 3 days easily. And I got sick after the anthrax shot before we went over the fence in Iraq. So you just got to be very careful and be smart about those kinds of things. I mean, do your own research, for crying out loud. You're going to trust Anthony Fauci? Good Lord, that guy. I think he got his medical degree off the back of a cracker box.
Oh boy, we're going real political incorrect today. But I did see a study that did bother me. Like Denmark has like the most vaccinated population, and they have a lot of coronavirus cases. I mean, they're vaxxed to the max. And I'm like, okay, that's worrisome to me. When I saw the statistics of these really highly vaccinated populations, I'm just like, why do they have more coronavirus than the ones that weren't? And
Israel's
Yeah,
on
and
their-
it's
Israel's
gotten to
on
the
their own
point
fork.
too where the Omicron thing, and I've talked to several doctors about this. The Omicron variant is nothing more than the common cold. It's upper respiratory. It's sore throat, that kind of thing. And the COVID virus itself comes from the common cold. So why should we be surprised?
So, so anyway, uh, for those who don't know, Sandy Pigeon and I he attended McLean Bible. I'm still a member technically. And we got a crew there with Joe Carter, David Platt, Wade Burnett, Mike Kelsey, and Eric Saunders, and a cast of characters to boot. I shouldn't laugh.
You could not have
Emory's been
assembled
following.
a bigger collection of knuckleheads in leadership than you've got, and
Well, every one of them's from the Southern Baptist Convention, and I say that as a graduate of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, but we didn't know. The only thing I knew about SBTS was I was getting a discount on my doctoral degree.
Exactly.
That's about it. But
Yeah.
Joe Carter worked at the ERLC, still writes for the Gospel Coalition. Scott Logsdon was the Family Research Center for the Southern Baptist Convention. Platt was the IMB guy. I mean, they brought in all those guys, but we're not a member of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, that's totally why you got a discount on going to a Southern Baptist seminary too, Sandy. That totally has. Totally not a member. Totally
not a member.
Totally.
So did the two other pastors who went there to get their MDivs. So,
Wesley, do you have any idea what we're talking about?
Yeah, sorry, Wesley.
Sorry. Sal, Sandy, and I have been kind of fighting this for like months now, so we're all on the inside.
Okay.
It all has to do with the woke church, Wesley. That's all.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, half the subscriber base is interested in all this stuff. And so we don't know how this is going to play out. But
yeah, if you weren't niche enough, so.
Yeah.
Niche. I like that. Yeah.
Just as an announcement, we're expecting another legal case to be coming related to this in several weeks. So there's not going to be end of news. In fact, there could be, oh my goodness, January 13th, there could be reports. And there was
we schedule a live stream for that night, Sal, in advance.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. Usually it's going to be the capstone report, but I was joking. I said, no, we're not going to hear some capstone reports for a while because Alan Hutchinson, the writer for Capstone, he's a big Alabama Crimson Tide fan. His whole Capstone report actually started covering the Crimson Tide before he went into religious matters. And the Georgia Bulldogs came from behind in the fourth quarter and just trounced his team. So we think he's kind of in a state of recovery right now. I shouldn't laugh. I don't hate it. I don't hate any team. It's just like I kind of like to see the other guys win the national championship every now and then. I didn't get to see the game, by the way.
See, I live near Cincinnati, so I was rooting for Cincy, but I didn't really care.
Yeah, they really did well this year, man.
Yeah, everybody in the local area after the first like 4 or 5 games, everybody in the local area is like, okay, we're gonna do it. I'm like, you have no chance. You are going, and then I'm like, oh, you keep winning. You're still winning.
Yeah, I hope they build a new swimming pool. I swam in that pool. Good Lord, 1980. They had the whole Norwegian national team was swimming for Cincinnati, but the pool was absolute crap. I mean, it was terrible, but that's my little anecdote.
Yeah,
Cincinnati.
That was 40 years ago, Sandy. Not to be mean, but
I got to ask you, Sandy, one question. They said Navy SEALs don't like being in the water because it's always cold and wet. Is that relatively true? Some people, because they're talking about SEALs didn't like being in underwater submersibles that were open. They said
yeah,
that was
well,
the job
that's the first submersibles I drove were they were, they're open, they're sealed, they're delivery vehicles, so you're you're driving it while you're wet. I mean, the canopy's filled up, the back's filled up where the guys are. They have the rucksacks, et cetera, in the back, and we're driving up front with pretty crude mechanisms, actually. But yeah, you have a Mark 15 rig on the back. I don't know what they're using now, which is like a 60-40 nitrox mix. And then you also have boat air. We had regular compressed air on the vehicle as well. And sometimes you would wear a dragger as well on the front. So you'd be, 3 rigs, plus you're trying to figure out all the, while you're underway, you're trying to figure out all your decompression tables, because they're all different for all 3 air mediums that you're breathing. So it's tough. But I had a kid in my SEAL Team A platoon, Billy, great big kid from Georgia. And he hated the water. And I said, Billy, why didn't you go to the Ranger Regiment, man? I mean, for crying out loud. But he ended up SEAL Team 6, did great. But yeah, there's a lot of guys that, man, they hate getting into SDVs, hate it. To me, that was the fun part, was swimming around in a harbor at night. I mean, you can't see anything. You get the compass board plastered to your face, but you're the master of the harbor, unless they turn the dolphins loose, then things can get a little dicey. But yeah, I used to like it. But yeah, it's cold, wet work, man. There's a reason you go through Hell Week, because you're going to be freezing your butt off for 6 hours, at a shot.
For you guys. Now, you talked about the dive tables, meaning depending on your depth, you had to did you mean like you had to come up gradually?
Well, you're breathing 3 different mediums. You have a Mark 15, which is an well, and I don't know what they're diving now, but they were supposed to come up with a new rig, but that was an electronically powered rig that would feed you oxygen. Then you had a scrubber in it, but you also had a diluent of nitrogen in it, so that you had a 60-40 mix, which means you could stay underwater longer and not, build up nitrogen, get the bends. But you're doing that while you're driving the vehicle along. So you're trying to figure out, because you're going to different depths depending on, where you are and, coming into a coastline or going into a harbor. But then if you're wearing a dragger on the front, which is completely 100% O2, which you can only dive to 20 feet, because oxygen gets toxic after 20 feet, you can start doing the funky chicken. You have to figure that out along with, so you're doing all these calculations while you're underway, so and I will tell you, 6 hours, if it goes very, very quickly.
Oh my goodness. We may have a member from McLean Bible, member of good standing here in Philip M. Greetings, brother. So it was really strange. Half my subscriber base are now just here to hear about all the church scandals. That wasn't but I want to thank all of them, because they've increased my subscriber base and I got the benefits of that. But the reason I asked you about the bends, I learned this only recently. The otter can dive to 250 feet. And he can swim up very quickly. I don't know how the otter avoids getting bends in the process, because it would be killing the divers if they just would swim like an otter. So the otter,
you can take a breath at ambient air at 0 gauge, whatever you're going to call it, 33% or 33 atmospheric. Dive down, and guys have dived down to 300 feet and then come back up, and because they do those deep dives. You ever seen the guys that get out to try to set the depth records?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The problem is you got to do it very, very slowly, because you can tear the alveoli and then have that air that you consume, just the one breath, because you're only going to have so much nitrogen in that one breath. It's when you're at depth that the nitrogen gets pushed into your tissues. And then when you come back up, because it hasn't been metabolized like oxygen is, it will start to grow inside. And so that's where you get bubbles in your joints, in your tissues, etc. And that's why if we get somebody that's bent, you got to put them into the chamber, go back down, crush that bubble that's in the joints or wherever it is. I had a kid who had what's called a, oh my goodness, arterial embolism. And we had to crush him it was about 6 hours. We kept him in the chamber, and I rode the chamber with him the whole time. And he wasn't that deep. And you can also, you can get mediastinal emphysema, which is, just going down to the bottom of a pool. And if you're working and you come up too fast, it can happen as well. But that's an extreme case. We've had a couple guys get that.
Is there's a series called God's Incredible Creatures in Alaska or something, and it was by a creationist, and it talked about the sea otter. It can go up and down 250 feet, and somehow it knows how to avoid the bends. It just knows how to, however it's equipped or behaviorally, it just doesn't have like the problems that we had to learn.
Well, if it's only taking one breath of air, I mean, the problem is when you're breathing the medium at depth, because you're metabolizing the oxygen, but the nitrogen has nowhere to go. That's kind of the issue. But for those mammals to do that kind of deep diving as well that's God's creation right there.
Amen.
Whales going down to 1,000 feet to hunt for squid, and then come back up. Just incredible.
I never heard of this. So Matt says, have you heard of the Retia mirabilia? No. It's a special organ that a lot of mammals have that allow them to avoid the bends. Mammals exhale before they dive.
So I have heard of that organ a very long time ago. I think it was probably like introductory bio class or something, which was like 10 years ago. But I didn't know anything of what, couldn't tell you what it did. So that's really cool.
It is cool. Never heard of that.
Philip M. said, is there going to be a live stream from the courthouse? They don't allow recording devices, at least in Prince William County. I presume that's going to be the same in Fairfax, but
it's going to be Sal live from Sing Sing prison in Illinois. I told you, Sal, you're going to get into prison ministry one way or the other. So.
No, we're actually trying to get, well, I'm not going to mention names. Get them to start a prison ministry. Yeah, there's just on a, Philip, God bless you for joining us. I believe Philip is someone who's attended some of the campuses, and some people have learned about all that's going on just through this stream. A few people have and said, I didn't know all this was going on. It's like, yeah. And so that means the church has done a good job of putting a very good face on Sunday morning, like there's nothing wrong.
Except for all the empty seats.
Oh, goodness.
Surprised they don't have dummies filling those.
Yeah. The thing is, some people that are used to only going to one service, they don't know like the other three had gotten canceled, so they don't realize what had happened. Like people that never went to the Saturday service would not know the Saturday service got canceled. So you think, oh, I'm still going to Sunday, and the pew still seems somewhat filled. But then the long timers have seen the decline, and everything just looks kind of like an empty cavern now. It's,
yeah.
I was so eager. I said, I want to go and photograph and count, but they're going to throw me in jail if I try to do that. So, anyway, we'll just see how that plays out. And I don't have any specific news. Although I will say this, I was saying I'm just, I introduced myself. I'm just a troublemaker, and I have some ideas of what needs to be done. so I may be trying to do some more reporting work. And that's what I can do, at least to try to tell the story. And I'm hoping to contact, there's someone that knows Kevin Ezell. He's going to come on my show. He was fired by Kevin Ezell, and so Bobby Gilstrap. And so this will be an interesting story because I want to hear what he has to say. And he may have insights on how the big Eva, the big evangelical, he may have some anecdotes on all the dirty laundry that we need to know of. But on a very serious note, from Deuteronomy 13, and I've been meditating on this verse, when Israel went into the promised land, God said he's going to let the false prophets come in, and he's doing that to test you, to see whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. So when I'm seeing what's going on with the SBC and all the woke stuff just destroying the churches, I'm like, okay, God kind of gave us the model of how he's going to do business. Because it's like, Lord, don't you want your churches to be pure and all? And just like you look back at Deuteronomy 13, he said, yeah, I want it to be pure, but I'm going to let you be tested to see how you're going to handle this. When I send the bad in, I'm going to just let these bad guys come in and see how you deal with it. And the Lord was commending, he had some stern criticisms for the Ephesian church, but he said, you do not tolerate this. You have going for you. You don't tolerate these evildoers. And I was just praying. I said, Lord, a lot of people said, why don't you just leave? And to me, it's like, if you have an opportunity to cleanse the church, you do it. You don't just leave. And that's one reason I decided to stay and still fight it out.
Yeah,
even when I'm trespassed and threatened with jail, I'm still a member. I did not resign. And I think they wanted to pressure me to resign, and I'm not. I'm not. And I said this on an open stream before, and I know some of the elders at McLean Bible, you've been listening on this. I've been asking some accountants to give me a list of questions. I want you as elders to ask Bill Steele, Larry Cooper, Wade Burnett, Dave Platt. You ask them these tough questions. And if they don't answer your questions, I suggest you resign. Because you don't want to be involved. I mean, if there's some shady stuff done there, you're not paid. You're volunteers. There's no need for you to get dragged down. Some overzealous prosecutor would be very eager to try to, dig up a crime and the financials don't look good. I mean, do you guys want to be implicated in criminal and civil fraud, possible money laundering? I mean, I'm not saying we know that for sure, but I'm suggesting that you as elders, if you're not given the books, and I know that some elders were asking questions and they were not shown the books, you don't want to be a part of this. And so that's my
God's
message to you.
purifying everything. He's ripped the cancer. He's ripped the he's ripped the scales off of everybody's eyes now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, that's me being a little bit of a troublemaker. I'm saying, they're saying, are you trying to split the elder board? It's like, yeah, to save their souls, to save their, their families could get dragged down into all of this. They don't pay you anything to be involved in a scandal. You can't lose 80% of your congregation and still report year over year revenues about the same. And you could just start to probe a little more. You can, do any of you elders know how much David Platt makes, for example?
Ooh, Mr. Cotta, I know.
Yeah. Some of the audience may not know that show, Welcome Back, Cotter, and who was it? John Travolta?
Yeah.
Or who was it? That was it.
Wesley's just looking at us like, what are you old dudes talking about? You know?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I don't know what you're talking about either. So,
Oh, okay. All right.
The one thing I will say, and I saw this fairly recently, I think outside of what he's being paid at McLean, he's making $20,000 to $40,000 per appearance to speak.
Yeah, that's on the All American Speakers website. He's making $10,000 to $20,000 an appearance. So if he's just going to those two conferences, you know, that now you're talking between $20,000 and $40,000. Where's that money going? You know, I mean, he's supposed to be. I don't begrudge a guy making the money. You know,
No,
I mean,
no,
but are you going to be the pastor or not?
And this is also the same guy who wrote a book chastising evangelicals for pursuing the American dream.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, but okay, is it dreams for you and not for anybody else? Like, is that how this works?
Yeah.
And one of the reporting projects I want, there's someone at McLean Bible, there's a couple there that followed the radical plan. It destroyed them economically, and they're trying to go to do their mission thing. They asked for just a little money. I mean, on the order of like $500 a month.
And they were promised that, and they got dissed.
Yeah, that
came back in financial ruin.
Yeah, and the amount that David Platt gave himself a raise for, a 20% raise, when they laid off all the staff while the church was dying. Yeah, see, these are 20%. So I mean, if you think he
could have paid for my new wood splitter.
Yeah, if he's earning anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000. That could be as much as an $80,000 raise. So you know, I still don't know why they want to not disclose the amounts, because other churches do that for their pastors. And yeah, sometimes I was like, yeah, you know, my senior pastor at one church was making more than me. I was a senior engineer, and it's like, okay, that does bother me a little bit, but if the congregation voted for it, I'm okay. But at least you're transparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course, I'm afraid that if the reason they're probably not being transparent is they know how bad it'll look if they actually reveal how much he makes.
Yeah,
and like I get it, McLean's a big church.
Yeah.
Okay, pay him. We want to pay him some big bucks, and it's Northern Virginia. McLean's a big church. It's expensive to live there. Okay, fine. I'm not so much caring about how much he makes, but a 20% raise. Good night.
Yep. Plus the fact that we bought him a house and he gets a parsonage out of that, you know, and a parsonage is considered tax free. So he pays no county taxes at all.
Yeah. And
but the American dream is evil. The American dream is evil.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, yes. Doesn't that sound so much like a communist leader? You know, he's living in luxury and he's complaining about the rich. Just it sounds all too familiar. And
it's like AOC. Speaking of which, is that little girl who imitates AOC, has she been back on the YouTube?
I don't think so, because
she's hilarious. Oh my
death
God.
threats. Yeah. Death threats were being made against this 8-year-old girl. Sad.
He was too good at imitating AOC.
Although AOC is kind of good at
AOC does a good job of making fun of herself.
Goodness.
Yeah. She's the little girl. The little girl is actually back on Twitter. I don't know if she's back on. I don't know if she's still on YouTube, because I didn't follow her there. But she's back on Twitter and she's still making fun of her, and it's still funny. But yeah, she does get death threats. She's 11 now. That little girl's 11, so she just turned 11. So
yeah, you know, Emory can appreciate this. He and I are just like on multiple fronts fighting. It's like when Sandy said, "Well, now you got to fight in all directions."
Yeah, exactly. It's like Chesty Puller at the Chosen Reservoir when they were surrounded by North Koreans, and he called back to headquarters and said we're attacking in all directions. So
Well, what happened to him? Puller, you said his name was?
yeah, Chesty Puller.
Oh, yeah. Did he survive the battle?
Oh yeah, yeah. Dick Marcinko talked about him in his book that he used to hang out at the Little Creek Oak Club, and Marcinko would go in and Puller would be over there, having the bag. He was an interesting cat, but you can't deny his combat prowess. He was unbelievable.
2 years ago, Patrick, I would have been surprised. I'm not anymore.
I don't know who these guys are.
Okay, so Stephen Furtick is kind of a health, wealth, prosperity gospel guy.
Oh yeah, he's
loopy.
He's nutty.
Yeah, I mean to the point where he's almost got a messiah complex.
Oh, no question.
Yeah. He's really bad news. If Platt's hanging out with him, well, I don't have any positive way to explain that.
Well, yeah, we're fighting. It's like I didn't.
Oh,
need
Francis Chan has gone off the deep end as well. I mean, he's always been a little goofball, but he's really gone off. He's now hanging out with Benny Hinn, for crying out loud. So
yeah, see, and
I tried to be insular.
Yeah, I tried to be insular and just focus on, the nerd stuff, but then I got dragged into this at McLean. But then it just like, oh my goodness, there's so much bad going on in evangelical churches. But I kind of sensed it, and now it makes sense why they didn't want me or Sandy teaching stuff about apologetics or evidence and reasons at the churches. It wasn't part of their business model. They really didn't care. And sadly, the business model was entertain and get people not to think and just get them to donate.
The usual megachurch model, not to be crass, but
yeah.
Yep. So all the ministries were taken away and all that money used for things like gap year and sending people on missions. Because if you're not doing missions, it's,
I'm all for mission trips. I'm all for that, but if you got people who are willing to serve in your church, let them serve. Like, that's the point.
Well, and the thing of it is that, and Sal and I have talked about this before, the mission of McLean Bible Church was to cure the sickness in Washington, D.C., because we have all these senators, congressmen, cabinet members, leaders of industry, all here, and you want to change the context of Washington, D.C., because after that, it radiates out because they go back to their home stations or we've had a lot of foreign dignitaries in there. We had people from Fox News coming in. Shannon Bream used to be a member, and they've all left. They're done. So
can't blame them.
Yeah, can't blame them at all. I mean, when you stand up there and say you guys are all a bunch of racists.
I mean, to be fair, this is why that the powers that be arranged for a woke takeover of that church.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And it's backfired on them. Huge.
I'm not so sure it has. I think they've achieved what they've wanted, which was destroy the church.
Well, yes and no. I think part of the goal was not only to turn it into a Southern Baptist church, which they did. They violated the Constitution, and now they're trying to extricate themselves from any association with the Southern Baptist Convention. But that ship has long sailed.
And it's not the fundamental problem.
But they wanted to have that influence with all those prominent people that live in Washington, D.C., but they've all split. They've all left.
Right.
So you have a very young populace that is in the church now, that people that, God bless them, they don't know any better. But also, a lot of people have hung on, trying to wait. I mean, I hung on for a year, but this whole thing has gone from 18,000 congregants to 3,500, brick and mortar. So in a sense, it's, that's why everybody has fears now of, the church being sold. So, and that money would go possibly to those mission areas, who would be the receivers of the money. So that's why everybody has is fighting this so hard, because, people spent a lot of time and effort to build that church up from 5 families,
Yeah,
so 50 years ago.
Just so people know what Sandy's talking about, according to the church constitution, if there's a liquidation of the church, the money could go back to the SBC and North American Mission Board. If the North American Mission Board claims this is their property somehow, and they are basically a real estate hedge fund at this point. The North American Mission Board, McLean could be a crown jewel in their real estate portfolio. I mean, it may be not quite that direct, but that's what we fear the end game is.
NAM is probably the single most corrupt evangelical organization on the planet right now. So,
yeah. But I wanted, while I have Sandy here, I wanted to just touch base on something. It's a total change of subject. It's somewhat related to the composition of the church, being 60% female and 50% male.
That's 110%, Sal.
Sal's mutating. So
he's doing the woke math where 4 plus 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. I'm sorry, Sal. Go on. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's all right.
See the shot, take the shot, Emory. There you go.
Yeah. I'm trying to adjust my camera here. I went totally out of focus. Oh well.
You still look like you just came back from a Colorado ski trip there, Sal.
Yeah. I'm totally out of focus now. Otangelo's here. How'd you get the link, Otangelo? I didn't send it out.
You replied all to Dr. Dan's email, and Otangelo was on that email.
Was he?
I'm pretty sure he was. Let me double check. I will double check, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Let's see. Oh. I did, didn't I?
I'm pretty sure that's what you did, Sal.
Okay. I gotta be. Tangibly, that was really meant for Sandy only. I'm sorry about that. Because there have been imposters that have come on and have pretended, and then we get bombed with nasty images. So, Otangelo, let me just say this: I'll write you in the back channel, and just as a courtesy, you can come on my channel sometime, and you and I can talk. So I did. I'm not trying to diss you. That was the security failure. I should have sent Sandy the link in the email. I'm really sorry, Otangelo. Because one time someone impersonating Patrick Alexander came on, and
we've been bombed at least once that I know of.
So the composition of the church. You did something in your graduate program, Sandy, that talked about the first responder security team and how that can get a lot of people engaged in the church. See, that to me is like a really it tends to lean toward the males. It was the first responder team, the FRT, dominated by males in McLean?
Well, dominated just because it just seemed, a lot of the recruitment was done. You see a guy that's got an army pin on, or he's got a law enforcement pin on. Naturally, I would just go up and say, "Hey, are you prior police officer? Are you federal law enforcement, military?" And ostensibly they would say, yeah, and hey, we got this team. Would you like to join? And so that's kind of the genesis of how that happened. Mm-hmm. But we had a girl who was, she was actually on Obama's detail. She's Secret Service. Actually, we had 2 ladies from Secret Service, and they're really good, really super. just with engagement skills that, sometimes you wanted a lady. I'll give you an example. We had a guy walk into third service once and had a huge backpack on, and he just looked like he was having the worst day of his life. And so I told one of the girls who was on the team, I said, "Hey, why don't you just walk over and she said, I got it. And she walked over there and engaged the guy. And the guy was a Maryland state trooper of all things. And he was going through a really ugly divorce. And she talked to the guy for 40 minutes and we put him on the team, and that was the kind of thing that he needed. But we have a lot of ladies. There were more ladies when I left. That we had one who was a neurologist. She works at George Washington University. She became our doc. But I will tell you that having those ladies there was excellent, because every situation calls for a different approach, and sometimes it's just the appearance of somebody coming up, instead of a knuckle dragger like me. And going over and just having a kind face, which I don't have. And engaging that person. And that's really what we focus on, is the first responder team. Yeah, we're all got military or law enforcement or whatever backgrounds, but you have to make it a ministry first. You have to care about the congregation. You have to care about people. And I will tell you, all the time we made guys go and just talk to everybody during services, while you're keeping your eyes peeled and you're listening to your headset, because it's especially the ladies who you engage and the families that you engage will give you also, on a pragmatic note, the best intel. They'll tell you who's looking a little shady, or they'll tell you, hey, this person's really hurting. I want to get them some help. And then we can refer them to a pastor or to one of the counselors. So it is a ministry first, and it has to be approached as a ministry first. And I've had discussions with other church security teams, and I said, you guys can't stand around like a bunch of Secret Service guys looking around, not saying anything and being stoic. You got to engage people. It's a ministry first.
Well, actually, the reason I asked, and actually my premise was wrong. I actually thought the security and first responder team was mostly guys, but I was just thinking.
Oh, mostly is. I'm not quibbling with you on that. I would like to have many more ladies on there, just for the engagement piece of that is vital. Now guy ends up being belligerent, then the ladies will come back and say, yeah, I think you guys better handle this one.
Well, where I was really headed with that is there's certain ministries that would tend to attract guys more than girls.
Sure.
And
yeah, the clothing ministry.
Yeah, that's totally gonna bring a bunch of guys.
Yeah. And the clothing ministry is known throughout Northern Virginia, or was. It's closed down still, but everybody knew who the clothing ministry ladies were, and they are the most dedicated bunch of ladies I've ever met. They're just literally fanatic, and but wow, what a service they give to people! Just amazing. The amount of time they spend down there.
So it seems like church, because it is a social structure, and there are kind of, I think women do like kind of relationships and groups where there's a lot of socializing, whereas I looked at the first responder security team to be a little bit more like, let's get after the bad guys, protect the church. And that tends to be kind of more of a masculine type thing. So I was just kind of thinking about it. And in the process, I said, yeah, there are definitely things that guys don't do to bond. Like, I actually wanted to ask you, among your SEAL team members, did you ever say, hey guys, let's go hang out and make cupcakes or something? I mean, did you ever do that?
Cupcakes, Sal? I'll tell you a funny story.
No, I mean, but I'm being serious, because the women in the church, they'll have all these events and let's cook bread together. I'm like, okay, I think where I was headed with this is there are definitely some things that are just very.
Guy who was a SEAL teammate with me. He was coming over to replace me as a staff guy on the 6th Fleet staff, and he when he arrived, he was telling me this funny story, because some of his some of my guys went into his platoon. And so I said, Todd, what'd you guys do for your going away party? He said, oh man, I had a keg of beer, and we had axe throwing, and we had this thing where you put a guy up on a stump, and you have a bungee cord with these huge water balloons, and you're not allowed to move off the stump, and they pull the thing back, and it, it's like the scene in Braveheart, where Mel Gibson is throwing that rock at Seamus. He heaves the rock at him, and it misses Mel Gibson, and then Mel Gibson whips a stone and knocks him out. but it's it's that kind of stupid man trick things, But no, but we used to have Bible study, and we would go to the range all the time and trade stories, and we just had a guy pass away suddenly before Christmas, and I'll tell you this story real quick, as I spoke at his funeral last week. He was always very coy about what he did in the military in Vietnam. He was in the 123rd Aviation Battalion out of Chu Lai, which is just below Da Nang, and a part of the 101st Airborne. So I started doing the research on him so I could, say some words about his military service. And I found out this guy was the most humble. And if you want to talk about a guy with biblical manhood, this was it. I mean, he was the absolute kind of guy you would say is a biblical man. I found out he was part of Mac V SOG, which, if you don't know what that were the guys mostly made up of special forces, but they were controlled by the CIA, and they went deep into Laos and Cambodia. And he was part of that group ad hoc called Recondo units. And he never talked about it. He said, so Gary, tell me a little bit about what you did. Oh, I just had fun over there and doing this. And then when I went in and saw his pictures, he's carrying the short carbines, which the only guys who carried short carbines like that, not even SEALs were carrying those, were all these Mac V SOG guys. And then I went and looked at his medals and everything else. The guy was an absolute, he was a badass. There's no other way to put it. And the only person he talked about it with was his wife a little bit. And she said, yeah, he was just the most humble guy you'd ever meet in his life. Came home, became a steam fitter, ran his own plumbing business, but came on the FRT and was just wonderful. I mean, the guy could have, talked an axe murderer into getting on his knees and repenting right there in front of him. He's just a wonderful guy. Just an absolute wonderful guy, but it's that kind of humble attitude that we look for. We don't want guys coming in, beating their chest. It's you got to have a biblical outlook and caring for people. Even guys that have come in troubled, like my buddy Cloy, who he just called me up the other about 2 hours ago. But he's a homeless guy, came into the church, had a huge backpack on, and had a couple of cocktails, shall we say, but he, and stormed out of the church after they wouldn't let him in. And I saw him at the 7-Eleven just down the street. I pulled in and I was going in to get something at 7-Eleven, and he's sitting out there. And so I went in and engaged him and found out his story. He'd been a Marine and during the Vietnam era, but didn't go to Vietnam or anything. But he's been homeless all his life. He's been a meth addict, a heroin addict, you name it. But he has now separated himself from that whole genre. He still lives in the woods. I helped him build a little shanty because he wants to live out there. And now I gave him an ESV study Bible, and he's calling me up and he said, brother, you're my mobile concordance. And he calls me up and he says, what does this mean? What does this mean in the Greek? Just a total change. And that's the kind of thing you want to see, from a guy who came into the church, real belligerent, drunk, etc., is now he sits outside a gas station and preaches the gospel to people coming in and out of the gas station. And the gas station owners feed him. So he monitors, he watches, he protects. He watches the Fairfax County Police come over and they say, "Hey, have you seen anything bad going on? And he'll give him a report. But he was totally into that world, and he's told me
Praise the
stories
Lord.
about it, and
Well,
just an amazing story. But that's the kind of thing you want is for your security team is guys who can engage. It's
Well-
not just being able to pull a guy out of a pew or something or tackle him.
I'm sorry. That you're hitting too close to home, brother. 'Cause I got pulled out of the pew.
Well, but the thing of it is, Sal, even the guys who told you were, you were kicked out of the church, they couldn't believe you were kicked out of the church because, and we can go into the whole story of that, but let's face it. I mean, nobody could believe this guy's not a threat. He's going to church.
So my line of discussion was actually pointed again to masculinity in the church. And someone referred, Graham Gould, God bless you, sir. He referred me to the book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. And it was, I thought it was very insightful, and it's an interesting discussion. But I got a point. I'm going to share a little bit from an Amazon. I don't have the book myself, but I'll share something from the Amazon comment section. I thought it was, let me just, I'll go ahead right here. He said, consider what I said earlier. Men hear the same thing repeatedly in the church service. What is it usually about? Relationships. It's not that men are opposed to relationships. We have plenty of them. It's that men don't really define themselves by their relationship. You won't have two guys hiding out in some trees in the woods hunting deer, and one of them says, hey man, I think we need to sit down sometime and talk about our relationship. And especially since the other man is likely has a loaded gun. And I'm like, yeah.
True enough.
And I was like, come to think of it, so many of I said, like, yeah, a lot of sermons are talking about, it's oriented toward the female audience. And it just, just the way he said that, it's like that finally registered. It's like, yeah, that just doesn't resonate with a lot of guys. But what Jordan Peterson says, 80%, he has a large proportion of guys that listen. And, some of the guys that were influential in my life, they're ex-Marines. They said, Sal, you wake up every morning. It ain't a playground. It's going to be hard. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of resonates with me, It's like, no, it's not like, oh, let's talk about our relationship with each other. That just does not, resonate with me. And that was a very interesting, just reading the comments and the whole premise, and there is a website, Why Men Hate Going to Church. That being said, I gotta salute the women at McLean Bible who've been fighting David Platt. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. They're tigers. Tell you.
Goodness, yes.
They are tigers.
They put us men to shame, honestly.
Yeah.
So
well, hey guys, I gotta sign off. It's already midnight. I'm probably gonna get the frying pan through the window here if I don't. So
I still have that video with Mrs. Pigeon there holding that frying pan. So, brother.
Oh my goodness. All right, guys. Hey, take it easy and
great seeing you.
All right, brothers. God bless.
Hey, thanks for dropping.
God bless.
Take care. I'm gonna read from that. You might like this, and Wesley, just if you wanna, you can hang on for this too. I'm someone in active ministry, and I strive to live a holy life before Jesus. But honestly, church can seem just like doing my duty often. I sit there and I hear the same thing I've heard over and over and over, and think about what's on TV when I get home or a game I'd like to play. I could often easily go with skipping all the music and going straight to the sermon. But then when we get to the sermon, it can be just as boring for me. If David Murrow is right, and I think he is, Murrow's the author of the book, Men don't really care for church. Christianity is the only major world religion that has a shortage of men in it. Why is that? Why is that we don't care for church? Is it we really don't? Is it we don't really believe in God, or we don't really care about Jesus? Murrow contends that one of the most important things in the mind of a man is to be a man. A man does not generally want to do anything feminine. If there was something like that, he would only care if he knew he was connected with other men with similar interests. Being one of the guys is of great importance to a man. There's also something that is not, this is also something that is not just shut off. Men are constantly trying to prove themselves and show what they are made of. Challenges are taken very seriously in the world of a man. The problem is the church often does not fit into that. Church has become very feminized.
David
Please
Platt
understand-
crying from behind the pulpit.
Oh, that was me.
That is fact. That has happened on more than one occasion. So that is fact.
Well, speaking as a man that you've seen me cry a lot on the channel, but people have said, well, Platt does it for, like when he was preaching 3 sermons, he would cry at the same point in the sermon each time.
Yeah, the point men don't generally like tears, particularly from other men, but they like it even less when it's staged.
Oh.
So anyway, sorry, I just had to throw that out.
All right. That's fair game, and I have to agree with you, and I don't like it that I've broken down a lot on camera here. That I'm.
There's a difference between being someone who's genuinely emotional and someone who is just staging it for his sermon, which is just like pathetic.
All right, so thank you. That still was I think it was kind of, I began to see it when I would sit through all 3 sermons and just just at this moment, you get the same, you get the same tearful thing right at the same moment. And then I guess you could clock it right in there, right at about, 35 minutes into the sermon, you're going to get that. So, and he says, please understand, Murrow is no way saying the gospel is feminine. He's also not saying we make any change whatsoever in the content of the gospel. How we present the gospel and what we emphasize of the gospel is often what really needs to be changed. Consider what I said earlier. Men hear the same things repeatedly in a church service. What are they usually about? Relationships. It's not that men are opposed to relationships. We have plenty of them. It's that men don't really define themselves by their relationships. You won't have 2 guys hiding out in some trees in the woods hunting deer, and one of them says, hey man, I think we need to sit down sometime and talk about our relationship. And especially not since the other man since the other man likely has a loaded gun. And when I thought of this, I said, hey Sandy, have you ever had your platoon say, hey, let's go hang out and make cupcakes together? Many churches become all about the family of God, which is true, but not about the kingdom of God, which is more outwardly focused. Men tend to be aggressive, who tend to be aggressive want to go out and do things. We don't just want to be internally focused. The music is often not really pleasing to a man. Much of the music relies on an emotional high of sorts and are really songs sung to Jesus that could be sung to your boyfriend as well. Many CCM stations play songs to reach women. And oh my, okay, we got to pause here, brother.
Most of the CCM genre right there. Not to be
Christian contemporary music. CCM, Christian contemporary.
Christian contemporary, however you want to phrase that.
And
Wesley, you're the music guy.
Yeah,
Go
don't
ahead.
get me started on this. Don't get me started.
No. We have been ranting for the last hour without you saying anything. So let's hear your opinion, because you're the music guy. We're not music. Well, Sal's a music person. I'm not. I can't play 2 notes together. So I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing Christianly about the Christian music industry right now. So, I mean,
You're not gonna hear nuggets from me.
yeah, there's
Go ahead.
just there's a lot of corruption. There's plenty of people exposing the things that are going on. But as far as the music, I've never been really interested in it. It's just it's very formulaic, even more so than regular, standard pop music that you hear on the radio. And oftentimes it's just repeating other pop music that you hear on the radio. As far as form, So, I mean, I'm super mad about it. So I'd rather just leave it.
Okay, I will push you on that, man. But
Well, I'll point out something. There has been in the Christian churches exactly this, where Jesus is treated like the boyfriend of the girl, and you could hear it in the songs. And one girl said, "Yeah, let's have a date with Jesus night," and I'm just like, okay, I'm a guy. That's not anything I would do. Okay, you shouldn't do it either.
really devalues who you think Jesus is. He's not your boyfriend. He's your Lord. He's your master. You serve him. You don't go on a date with him.
And I heard some girls among their conversations like, yeah, Jesus is the man for me. Or I'm just like, okay, this is not the way you should view him. And unfortunately, there are some Christian songs, even there's one Christian hymn that I heard, and I'm just like, no, this is so inappropriate. It just isn't right. I would not, as a guy, feel comfortable singing that hymn. And especially now in the modern contemporary, I'm just like, okay, So anyway, I think we're all on the same page as far as that goes. But this sometimes slips into the church, unfortunately.
A lot of it does, and I'm not going to pigeonhole any particular denomination with this, but a lot of the music that is coming into the church now is coming through places like Bethel and Elevation, which don't have the best theology to begin with. And they do, and because that style of worship, even if you avoid the fact that Bethel and Furtick are heretics, even if you just forget about that, the style that they worship in that denominational style is a very emotional style. So that filters into the music on top of the terrible lyrics. And so you end up with even mainstream evangelical churches singing music that is coming from heretical, very emotionally charged backgrounds. And you end up with, Jesus is my boyfriend. So it's ugly.
All right, I'll move on a little bit. Okay, so we also have a problem when we present gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Jesus was certainly the Lamb of God, but he was also the Lion of Judah. Look at the pictures of Jesus on many covers of Bibles and in Christian bookstores. This Jesus often looks like a wimp to men. Men don't want to follow a wimp. And so when you look at the Psalms, well, you look at the entire Old Testament, they talk about the Old Testament God, that's Jesus. And in the New Testament, when, unlike modern Christian culture, Jesus was feared. Like when the 7 sons of Sceva tried to use his name to do an exorcism and they got punished for it. Fear, you see that in the New Testament. Fear fell on everyone, and they reverenced Jesus' name. And in Revelation, the world will be saying, "Rocks fall on us, mountains fall on us. The wrath of the Lamb is protect us from the wrath of the Lamb." So I'm just quoting some scriptures there.
Right.
So, and it says here, this doesn't mean either that we chase out the women, not at all. Women need to be in church, and when men start going, women start going more as well. Statistically, if you want to reach the average family for Jesus, focus on the father. There's even research that one of the leading factors in keeping a teenager of either sex from apostatizing is if their dad takes his Christianity seriously. If you're looking at this thinking it's about the patriarchy or something like that, then you're missing the point. If anything, you're giving men the picture that to be a true Christian, they should cease being men. It's not going to work to reach them. Instead, make the church a place that lets men be men. The book even ends with Murrow asking a group of pastors how many of their churches, had more men than women. Only one pastor raised their hand. Not only that, that pastor had nail polish on her hand. Oh, oh, ow, ow, ow. This was a woman who had read Murrow's book and took it seriously. She took out feminine decor in the church and removed a lot of songs and got others like A Mighty Fortress Is Our God and Onward Christian Soldiers, and allowed days for guys to even wear sports jerseys to church. She started preaching sermons about guy topics, including a series on God loves sex. Okay, all right. So the result, her church grew among men and women both. All right, not that I'm endorsing women pastors, okay? But Murray's book is the kind of book I wish I could put in the hands of every pastor in the country. It's a book I thoroughly enjoyed, and when I had to interrupt my reading of it, I was always looking forward to getting back into it. It is one of the most important books I think I have read, and I highly recommend it. Nick Peters, it's Nick Peters, Deep Waters Apologetics. Yes, Nick Peters is very much a guy. He's kind of autistic like a lot of the engineers I know. So yeah, and autism is more prevalent in men. And you know, that's another. So Emory, your thoughts?
I think he's hit the nail on the head. I mean, other than the woman pastor's bit, but I mean, I think he's hit the nail on the head. I mean, men do not view men love their own families, but men do not want to add to their, generally speaking, do not want to add to their families by incorporating a church of several thousand people or several hundred people. Men want goals, right? And this is why sometimes, and I don't mean to be rude to husbands and wives, but this is why a man will put in a lot of effort to marry the girl of his dreams, but after they get married, that effort falls off. Why? Because he got his goal, right? Men are goal oriented, and the church does not give men goals to strive for. It just tells them, well, do your Christian duty, and that's good enough. Well, men don't want to do that. Men don't want to sit in a pew and just listen to a sermon. They want practical points of application. They want to go out and say, okay, we got this thing out of the sermon. Here's what I'm going to do with what I just learned. And unfortunately, we do not get that in the church. Unfortunately, at least not very often. We do get it sometimes. You go occasionally. We'll get something. You'll get it on Father's Day, because then the pastor will be telling the fathers how bad of husbands they are and how much better they need to do for their wives. You will not hear that sermon on Mother's Day, by the way. What you will hear on Mother's Day is that how great mothers are. That's what you will hear on Mother's Day, but you will not hear that on Father's Day. You will hear, you're terrible. You need to do better for your wife and your kids. And this just kind of illustrates the feminist mindset that has infiltrated the church. It's all about catering to women. Now, I'm not saying women should have things that are dedicated for them, and because that's important. There are certain things that women are better at than men. I don't think men belong in the nursery, which is a general rule of thumb. Like, I don't think they belong there. So there's places for both, but you need to recognize that if you get mom in church, okay, wonderful. You're probably going to lose the kids. And then grandma's going to be coming to church wondering why her grandkids won't come to church. You get dad in church, you probably get the whole family in church. because women, not to be, this is not trying to be misogynistic or sexist, but women tend to be followers more than they tend to be leaders. They want someone to, and that's just a natural tendency. I'm not saying they're bad at leading in certain circumstances. They can be good at it. What I'm saying is that the natural tendency is for women to want to have someone lead them. It's the natural order of creation. And if their husband, now they'll come to church on their own anyway, and they'll bring their kids when the kids are little. But if dad doesn't come, they're not going to, eventually the kids will say, well, dad doesn't go, so I'm not going. But if you can get dad coming to church and you get dad dedicated to church, he will lead his whole family into there. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. But I also should point out I come from a very, very conservative background. So this is not, but I mean, even in the conservative churches I grew up in, the men to women ratio was probably about 2 to 1. Maybe a little bit less than 2 to 1. We did have a lot of families and couples.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not saying I have any idea of the solution to this. The first thing was I never even realized there was a problem until I heard this. And then it really didn't, I got to confess something. When that girl said, let's have a date for Jesus night, she was saying, I thought that was actually kind of cute. All right. I thought that's so sweet. She wants to give her life to the Lord. God bless her for that. Honest. And now that I look back, I said, no, that's really inappropriate. And that should not be in the church. And I should have been more upset, but I didn't know it was a problem. I thought, hey, it's great someone wants to have a relationship with the Lord. And
yeah, I mean, we unfortunately, and I'm not going to go, I'm not in the same camp as you are on some of this stuff, Sal, but we have reduced Jesus from King, Lord, and Savior to friend, comforter, and, boyfriend. I mean, we've significantly reduced what his role is.
Well, I'm with you on that now, but I'm realizing I didn't even know what that girl was saying was just pretty awful now looking back. And guys had been trying to point out to me that they didn't like those kind of quote unquote love songs. And actually from a musical standpoint, some of them were beautiful. And I thought, come to think of it, if you were talking about her boyfriend, that's actually a pretty beautiful song. It's like, okay, and now looking back, I'm like, gee, I didn't realize this. It's, sometimes they say to get better, you have to know you're sick. And I just did not, and the Chinese church is predominantly female, I believe, and it is one of the more courageous churches in the world.
Yeah, and again, I wasn't in any way trying to rip situations like that. I get that. Like, I get that kind of situation's a little bit different. And in that situation, it's much harder for a man to convert because a man is looking at it and going, I got to take care of my wife and my kid. And usually it's only one child in China. The thinking, if I convert, man, and I get arrested and I get killed, who's going to take care of my wife? Who's going to take care of my baby? So that's hard for a man. That's tough because that is a man is hardwired to protect what he cares about.
So I mean, we did identify some things. It's like, come to think of it, maybe, sermons that say, oh, we have to be nicer to each other. That just does not resonate with me. And I don't, and I've been thinking about, one of the most interesting Sunday schools I was ever a part of he was an ex-B-52 bomber pilot. And he was relating the Christian faith to his experiences in the Vietnam War. And I thought that was the best Sunday school I ever heard. And I'm sorry I don't even remember the guy's name, but that was like, yeah, I really like this, and I can't tell you why. And so, Sandy Pigeon is here. He's an ex-Navy SEAL. And it's like I could just listen to him for hours. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
And when he talked about that guy that was the humblest guy that you'll ever meet, and he's very meek, but he was a great warrior in Vietnam. It's like for some reason that really resonates with me. you know, like when Sandy would call me up, he said, Sal, you got to be more regimented, you know, with this. And just like that meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, you got to do it. You know, sometimes when you're faced with a lot of challenges, that's when you have to be even more scheduled and disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
And if I heard sermons like that, you know,
this is
that
why
would
the
mean a
Jordan
lot to me.
Peterson clean your room message resonates.
Yes. Something as simple as that, clean your room.
Because first of all, a lot of boys are growing up without fathers. We've got an epidemic of fatherlessness, particularly in certain communities. A lot of boys are growing up without dads, so they don't have a dad to come in. I mean, it's one thing mom says it, okay, whatever, I don't care. Dad comes in and says it, oh, we're in trouble now. We better get it cleaned up. You know, it's a completely different thing, and I know this because I grew up with two parents. If mom said it, you know, at the time I was a teenager, I knew I was in a little bit of trouble if I didn't do what I was supposed to do. But if dad got home and dad said, go do, you better go do. If you wanted to live, you better go do. And so they're missing that molding, shaping influence of a father who can not just tell them, go clean your room and actually follow through with it, but also can take them aside and say, hey, son, this is what it means to be a man. This is what a man does in this situation. This is how a man handles this. And there's nothing, and I'll tell you, as a teenage boy, I can tell you this. There is nothing a teenage boy wants more than to be a man. And that's why they do that's why a lot of times they do stupid stuff. Because they're trying to, I don't know, prove their manliness. Usually to a group of even stupider friends. But they're trying to prove this sense of being a man, and they desperately want to be looked at as a man and someone who's can handle the things that life throws at them. And when they don't have a father, they aren't told how. So they get, and sometimes even when they do have a father, they aren't told how. They hear from their mother, well, don't do that. That's dangerous. Don't do that. That's whatever, you know. And what they hear from dad is, do it. If go ahead and do it, but if you break your neck, it's on you. You know, seriously, that's the kind of thing that boys want to hear, because they're like, okay, yeah, we're allowed to do stuff that's dangerous, but we have to consider the risk. We have to think about, you know, whether or not it's a balanced risk reward scenario. It's trained to think that way, whereas men who are brought up thinking only of safety get us in the pandemic that we're in right now. The religion of safe, anybody? But the ultimate point of this is men, in part because of fatherlessness, but in part because of the sorry, I'm braining out here. In part because of feminism, in part because of fatherlessness, and in part because of the feminization of the church, men do not feel welcome in church because they don't feel like they can be a man in church. They don't feel like if they start talking about throwing axes and going to the range, that the pastor's not going to rebuke them for being aggressive. And I've heard of this happening.
Mm.
You know, where they've said, well, that's not right. Or they feel like if they go to church, the pastor's going to tell them that they need to submit to their wife as she submits to you, which is completely unbiblical, but it goes around in evangelicalism. That stuff happens. And so they feel like they're being belittled as a man, even at church. Like if you watch television, that's all they do is belittle men. Like the man is the butt of the men are in comedy shows. I don't watch these, but even back in the 60s, it was getting this way, where men were the butt of every joke. Women were smarter. Women were the ones running the household. Women were the ones running the job and the office and whatever, and on and on and on. And okay, fine, but if you want to put some of those shows out there, okay, I don't really care. I don't watch them anyway. But when that's the only thing on television, men can't watch television without being belittled. Men they can't even watch sports without being told they're racist. Right?
Really? That's a new development.
Yeah, I mean, well, because every sport league is going woke. I mean, NASCAR, which was one of the last non-woke sports, just signed a deal to work with a bunch of LGBTQ people. So, like, men don't want that. Why do you think men watch sports? Because it's a bunch of dudes running around competing for some ball or puck or some other prize. Men like that kind of stuff because there's a goal. There's something you're working together, or maybe not even together, but you're working as you're working towards a goal. And men like that kind of thing. Why do you think so many men? My dad runs an indoor sports complex. Why do you think so many men come out for indoor flag football for adults and stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning to play? You know why they do that? Because A, it's camaraderie with other men, which they don't get anywhere else. A. B, it allows them to get their competitive juices out in a way that they can't do anywhere else, because they can't do it at the workplace. The HR department will fire them. They can't do it at home because their wife runs the home and they're not allowed to question that, right? Or their girlfriend or whatever, whoever. I mean, these aren't Christians, so they can't do it in the public sphere because that's all female dominated. So where can they do it? They go to sports. They go somewhere where they can feel like they're men. And I don't.
It just occurred to me, what's one place that's dominated by men? The internet.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we end up?
Yeah, we get pushed onto the internet because it's a place where you can find people who are like-minded and have conversations like this one. I couldn't have this conversation in most evangelical churches without the pastor telling me that I was in sin.
I'd like to welcome Sister Janet here, and she shared the story about her late husband. He was a very sweet and kind guy, but he worked hard and he could take a lot of pain. It's a real man.
Yep.
I respect men like that.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was like that. I mean, you look at me, that was Dad. He's the sweetest guy on the planet. But the guy worked hard and he was courageous. Oh my goodness, he was courageous. You would not know, that he was such a great warrior in World War II. But, sometimes, I know this will sound funny, when I see some of these convenience store clerks and, they had the foreign accent, and that's Dad. You would not, just a humble guy, and just, you would not know that he had a heart of a hero inside of him. And when I see those clerks, it's like I almost want to give them a hug and say, "You remind me of my dad." Because go on.
I apologize for going on that monologue. I didn't mean to go on such a lengthy monologue.
No, it's beautiful.
But your dad is the kind of guy that I would want in a tough situation, but he's not the kind of guy I would expect to find in an evangelical church.
Yes.
And that is a I'm looking for a word here that isn't going to be bad. That is a very, very strong indictment on evangelicalism as a whole.
Yeah. So, I was just thinking, because I was doing a series on romantic love and I'm still in the middle of it. The first installment was about my mother and father. And I was going through my dad's diary and I was reflecting, just kind of like when Larry Elder was talking about his dad. And he said when he had that conversation with Dad, because he was estranged from Dad for a while, and they finally had a conversation, and he's confronting his dad about how he's treated, and then the dad explained, he said, well, I was getting 4 hours of sleep a night, maybe only 3, and I got a job washing toilets because that's the only job I could get. And Larry Elder said, I started to feel smaller and smaller and smaller, and I began to have that much more respect for Dad. And as I was reading my dad's diary, it's like, oh yeah, he really was a towering giant in so many of his virtues and qualities. And, now that he's passed away, 18 years gone, I'm beginning to really appreciate him more. I'm sitting in the very seat here in his office, from where he commanded our household. And, I don't know. I didn't really have a point, but I was just thinking he had a lot of the qualities. When they said the World War II generation was the greatest generation, he embodied a lot of that in terms of the way they behaved and acted. And when I see these these documentaries on the World War II veterans, a lot of them are just like that. You know, they don't look like some tough guy. They're just very meek and quiet, and they took a lot of pain, and they just did their job and didn't whine. You know,
Yep. Yep.
They were tough. You know, one nurse was saying she's treating World War II veterans, and she said these, you know, the kind of pain that these guys are going through because now they're elderly and all the treatments. She said these guys were tough as nails.
Yep. And Sal, I will just point out to you, even at a young age, Sal, you were looking for this, and I'll tell you why. You're the guy who buried shrapnel in his chest and then didn't tell his dad about it.
Oh. Okay, I have. All right, occasionally, I'm not going to do this on here, but occasionally, my friends, I'll take my shirt off. You can see the shrapnel scar on my chest. I was generally a good boy, but I'm the sort of boy the parents would worry when they get home that their house wasn't burned down because I really like to play with explosives. And I built a rocket. I was trying to build a rocket engine, and I put it in a metal casing, which was a mistake. And the pressure got very high and it exploded right here. And so it was a miracle I didn't lose a few fingers. Piece of shrapnel went into my chest, and I was hospitalized for 2 days. But I was bleeding all over. I was drenched in blood, and I said, I'm going to get in trouble. And I tried to hide it. And I didn't tell Dad until I had to take the trash out. I said, Dad, I can't take out the trash today. He said, why? I said, I'm kind of not feeling so good.
But I mean, this plays into like how guys operate. Like if a guy, this is not so much now in the WIMP generation we have, but if you took a hit, you kept going. If you could, you kept going. And I mean, I've seen guys, even for like sports, play through stuff that I'm like, how are you even walking?
Yeah.
Like, and they'll just play on through it. And it's because there's a couple of things going on. One, sometimes it's dedication to the team, the people around you. Sometimes it's, you know, there is no way that anybody's ever going to see me quit. You know, but that is a masculine virtue where it doesn't matter how much pain, how much misery, how much suffering you're in. Patrick.
Oh, Patrick.
Yo, no, thank you. But to illuminate the point, that kind of pain, you know, you just work or you play through it. You don't right. Quit. Now, maybe after the game you have to go to the hospital, but you don't. This is the reason that you hear stories about these guys in World War II, and you hear it even in Afghanistan now, where guys will get shot, guys will get shrapnel, guys will get sprayed with, you know, a flamethrower or whatever, and they'll just keep on going until they get shot enough times that their body just can't keep going, or the battle's over, and then everybody finds out, oh yeah, they've been shot in about 6 places, and they're gonna bleed to death if you don't get them back to a hospital.
And I gotta point something out. I wanted to talk about Jesse Smollett on once, and Rebecca said, no, don't do that. You know, you're gonna tarnish your story about Mom and Dad. And I said, no, Rebecca was right. But I wanted to go on a rant. I said, okay, look at the man today. He embodies, unfortunately, represents it. Oh, I'm such a victim. Look how I've been mistreated. Oh, please pity me. Oh, and it wasn't even real. It was a hoax. And like, you know, that's where our culture has gone.
Yeah.
Even a man, it's like, oh, I want to be pitied. That's what I really need.
Admittedly, he's a homosexual man, so he's not a man. But that's neither here nor there.
I'm sorry to even act that out because it looks just terrible. And
yeah.
I also learned something, I did some years ago get a book on a manual. It's like on manuals on how to date and how a man should conduct himself. And a lot of it was the feedback of women. You know, they'd say, how should a man behave? And one thing you don't do is you don't go up to a woman and act like you're going to shrivel up if she says no. I mean, you just don't come up with that attitude like, oh, you're going to hurt my feelings so bad if you don't accept me.
Yep.
You know, do not do that, right? Just, and I have to admit, I realized I've been doing a lot of that, and that's why, you know, when that changed, I learned something. It's like, okay, you have to get to the point where you can take the pain of rejection, and they'll respect you for that.
And again, this goes back to a woman does not want someone who is like her. She wants someone who is a little bit stronger and willing to lead and willing to deal with, take some of the hits, because, you know, ultimately, in a sense, what a marriage is, in a sense, is the husband is protecting the wife, and the wife is helping the husband do what the husband needs to do. I mean, that's how God drew it up.
Well, exactly.
And that's why you don't get anywhere with whimpering and whining. Not to be crude, but I mean, women don't want that. And not that this is, I'm single. Well, I will disclaimer, I'm single, so I'm not an expert, but you know, that is something that is, they don't naturally want, because it's outside of the created order. Men are supposed to be, and I know that we get men in the evangelical church get mocked for having a John Wayne complex and trying to be tough and macho and all this. I would take guys who act like John Wayne over guys who act like UC Smollett any day of the week.
Oh, amen. But I mean, you could tell now that I have a lot of admiration for my dad.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at me.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at me, and people say I have a really sweet disposition. That was Dad, but he was tough as nails inside. He was tough as nails. Oh my goodness, he was tough as nails.
I would not have wanted to get on your dad's bad side. I feel sorry for the guys who asked for your sister's hand in marriage, because that must have been a terrifying experience.
Actually, it was really funny, and you know, I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on my dad, but you know, he really, like a lot of fathers, he was probably besieged with so many other worries, and like some dads, he just wasn't that involved in my sister's choices. It was more my mother. It was more my mother, and you know, that can happen. You know, man, it's just so burdened with everything else. You know, the economic situation. He's not dealing with the relationships. So
sorry, I didn't.
Where I was headed, I wanted to talk about, you know, in my series, you know, Faint Heart, Never Want to Fear a Maiden. And when we're trying to point out the defined roles of males, I said, look what happened on the Titanic. Why was it instinctive that the men would be the ones to sacrifice their lives, not the women, when there are only limited number of lifeboats? And I said, this may be hard to swallow, but you see this in so many areas of biology. The males are expendable. They are designed to sacrifice themselves. And I said, don't you see kind of a little bit of the gospel here, just kind of written throughout a lot of the relationships of males and females? Even in biology, it's the guys that are sacrificed, because the fertilized, you know, in an extreme case, the pregnant or the fertilized egg inside the woman, that has to be protected at all costs. And it's like, at all costs, the male will die to sacrifice, in many cases in the animal kingdom, for the female, because it's just not going to work any other way. You can't kill the offspring with the wife. Right. And that instinct is so strong. And I said, I wanted to confront a feminist. I said, what do you think we should do on the Titanic? Do you want to sacrifice the women or the men? Something has to go. Do you want equality there? But that carries over into the man's role as protector, first of all, in the family. If someone's going to die, you kind of expect the guy to give himself up first. It's just the way things work, even at the biological level. And interestingly enough, that's the one time it's like, yes, some parts of evolutionary biology for the wrong reasons actually get it right, because Jordan Peterson does a lot of stuff with evolutionary biology. It's just that his mechanism for why it's that way is different than creationists, but he actually gets that right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just amazing that even someone from not exactly coming from the Christian perspective could independently gather that just from watching males and females in the animal kingdom. And he said, yeah, this is what the guy has to do.
Yep. And I just want to confirm, because Janet has been kind of putting some stuff in the chat. Janet, I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. I'm not saying that men have to be all brute and no gentle. But what I'm trying to point out is that men don't naturally desire the more feminine graces, I guess. They're more naturally attuned to things that require more action and are willing to deal with more pain, as a general rule of thumb. Now, again, general rule of thumb here. I'm not extending this to any particular scenario at all.
Well, it's just like what I asked that rhetorical question to Sandy. I said, do you ever get with your guy friends and say, let's cook cupcakes?
And the response you got was,
I kind of wanted to hear that story.
Yeah.
I want to hear how badly they laughed the guy out of the Navy who suggested it. I mean, cooking cupcakes. Okay, yeah.
Well, there was a girl I was with, and she was hanging out with the other women in the church. She said, "Oh, I'm going to spend the afternoon with them. We're going to cook bread." And I thought that's cute. It never occurred to me to think, yeah, guys have never done that. I mean, I don't know any guys that ever said,
yeah. Other than professional chefs, I can't see any guys ever doing anything like that. Like, I can't see that happening. And there's a reason. Okay, so this is a recent current event. Some guy who works in the Ministry of Labor in Canada took a picture of his wife shoveling snow and put it up on Twitter. And he said in the comment, after my wife worked a 12-hour shift as an RN, she still has the energy to shovel snow. I'm going to go make her breakfast. And he got scalded, understandably. Why is he? I mean, first, even just forget the whole male-female divide. She just got home from a 12-hour shift. You're taking her picture from inside instead of helping her shovel? What the blazes is wrong with you? Even if she wants to shovel. Okay. Even if she wants to shovel. What the blazes are you doing inside, taking your picture and posting about it on Twitter? But he got blasted for that by women and men. And the reason for that, because we naturally, even the people who were black, yeah, I saw that. That's the only post from her account, Matt. So I saw that. That's a brand new account. That's the only thing she's ever posted. So I think that was damage control. But the reason you get blasted for that, even if his wife did enjoy it and did want to do it, okay, fine. But the reason it looks bad and the reason you get blasted for that is because everybody instinctively knows, wait a minute, that's the man's job. He's supposed to be the one out there braving the frostbite, because this is Canada. He's supposed to be the one out there braving the frostbite and shoveling the snow. Like, this is the thing that men do for women, because they're physically usually, I mean, if the guy's crippled, okay, different story. But, usually the men are stronger. They're, more willing to tolerate the miserable weather that Canada has right now. So that's the reason he got blasted. And most of the blasting wasn't from Christians. It's just people who understand how the created order is supposed to work.
Yeah. So if I really had to define the male role and what we see in biology, I don't want to get into the idea that the man has to be the dictator. I would define it by sacrifice. And it says in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things. And I'll tell you the other anecdote I wanted to share. And you're talking about how men need to do something. Some years ago, and this was after Dad passed, and my sister Elizabeth and I were caring for Mom, and the earthquake hit. Some of you know that earthquake that hit Virginia.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's really interesting how we reacted when our house was shaking. My sister, I was strong enough to lift my mother out of the chair and try to take her to some place a little safer, but she had osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis. I could have paralyzed her if I broke her bones. I mean, I have to treat her very, very gingerly. And the only way I could have done that is to lift the chair that she was in. And I needed my sister's help to do that, because even though I might have been strong enough to carry it, it was just bulky.
Right.
What she did when it was the earthquake was hitting, she just started screaming and praying. And I got really upset because I was wanting to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to, I didn't scold her, but what I felt in my heart, I wanted to say, quit acting like a frightened girl and screaming. And I was like, oh, she is a frightened girl, come to think of it, do something.
Right. But
and so for me, my reaction was, let's do something.
Right.
And remember, and some of you know the story of my dad. Before Mom and Dad got married, after the war, World War II, there was an armed attacker threatening my mom. And Dad intervened, and he was unarmed. And however he said it, it was effectively, he said to the attacker, who had a gun and he didn't, he said, you got to go through me first. You got to kill me first before you get to her. And the attacker relented. My mom was impressed by that, by the way. They got married months later. That's when I said, faint heart, never won a fair maiden. And so it was interesting that my first, my sister Elizabeth was just screaming and praying, God bless her, because we did need prayer. But my first instinct was to drape my body over my mom's head and shoulders as best as I could. I said, if any debris fall, it's going to hit me first. And I said, yeah, that's just being like Dad again. It's good.
Yeah.
I'll take the bullet from my mother. And I didn't even, and now looking back, it's like I didn't even give it a second thought. And I didn't fault Elizabeth for not having the same instinct, but it's just like, it's just funny how you just kind of revert to the way we're kind of made. And now looking back, I said, I didn't even give it a second thought. It's like, that just came so natural to me. And I could see now what Dad was doing when that armed attacker was threatening my mother. He said, you got to kill me first before you get to her.
And see that's how men are wired. If you mess with somebody they care about, you even threaten to do it, most men are going to step in. And this is why I cannot stand John Piper, and other reasons beside this, but this particular one, where he says that a husband should not defend his wife if a man breaks in and tries to harm her, that he should let the man do whatever he wants. And I cannot.
You said that?
Yes, that is part of Piper's pacifism. You aren't allowed, can't shoot the guy, can't beat him up, nothing like that. And that to me, as soon as I heard, I'm like, I don't care anything else about what you have to say. I don't care. You could be the best Bible. I don't care. I do not care what you have to say about any other topic. Because if you can't defend and take care of your wife, I don't care what you say. Now, if you try and you get shot and you get killed trying, I don't care. Good, you did your job. You were a man. But if you sit there and watch somebody do something to her because you won't do anything about it because you don't think for some reason you should, good. Bring the words in.
Yeah.
So help me God. You dare do that in front of me. I'll break your neck after I'm done with him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But that's why I don't care.
I
don't care what he says.
I did not know that.
He can say anything he wants. I don't care. It's all noise. Because if you won't, I mean, I know maybe a little bit out of context, but the Bible says a man who will not provide for his own family is denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, I can't think of anything else more important for a husband to do for his wife, other than to lead them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, than to protect them?
And this could extend. It's like, okay, what about your kids?
Yeah. And I just can't. I don't like. He can say anything else he wants until he backs off of that. I don't care. Just that's not a man. That's not a man. I'm sorry. That's just not a man.
So
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go on a rant, particularly at 1 o'clock in the morning. I have to go to work tomorrow, so I probably need to go to bed.
Oh, well, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
And Wesley, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I just wanted you.
You're good.
You've been wanting
You're
to go
good.
in some screenings. I wanted you to feel a part. And apologies to Tangelo. I'm going to send him a letter and invite him to come on one of my
Wesley,
screens.
I
sometime.
apologize for the monologues. I usually don't monologue. I usually let Sal do that. But sorry, Sal. So I apologize for the monologue. This is a topic, though, I do feel very, very strongly about. I'm not saying I'm like some kind of macho man or anything like that. I'm not. I'm a nerd. I'm not a man's man. But there are certain things like I just can't let go. So I apologize for that. And I'm sorry that we got derailed before you could ask Sal all your questions.
Oh, you're fine.
Well, I guess that's on that note we can end. We actually got to talk, when Sandy came on board, and we got to talk about that book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. I think that was very insightful. And just looking at my own life, how I stayed in the Christian faith was because I was fighting the evolutionists. And in the process, that restored me to the faith. And I nearly left 20 years ago. That was more fulfilling to actually feel like I was kind of in an intellectual battlefield, and I wasn't playing nice. It's like I wasn't going to these evolutionists and saying, hey, I think we need to try to get along better. Let's talk about our relationship. That was none of that,
Does this sound like The Fool and the Heretic to you, Sal?
Well, what is that?
That's Wood and Falk's book. Todd Wood and Daryl Falk.
Oh.
Let's all get along. Sorry, I'm not saying that either one of them are effeminate, by the way. I'm just pointing out that sounds very, very much like let's all kiss and make up and get along instead of
please. Oh.
I'm sorry. Anyway, so I need to go to bed. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks
Wesley,
to the
thank
audience.
you for putting up with the monologue. I appreciate it.
No, it was enjoyable. Thank you.
All righty. Take care, everyone. God bless you.
Guys.
Take
Good
care.
night.
God bless.